Right, so the first one is how has lockdown been for you?
What, in general or to do with
in general?
It's been, well, I'm lucky enough to live in a house with a garden, and I'm also lucky enough to have a job that allows me to work at home. So I'm not saying it's been exciting. It certainly hasn't, because been locked down, not be able to go on holiday, not see family, not see friends, not go to the pub, not go to the football. But at least I've had, the luxury of working at home and a garden, set up an allotment in my garden, and sort of got plenty to do here. But so it's not been too bad. I think talking to people at work, the way that COVID and lockdown has impacted upon people has been hugely different. I've got friends that have been hospitalised. I've got people that I work with that are younger than me that live in flats with no garden, that have been locked up and only been able to at various points to go for their daily walk. So it's a very different story. I think I'm on the lucky end. None of my immediate family have been ill. I've got a nice place and I haven't had to go to the office. So for me, not that bad.
And Colchester not having a great season either.
Yes, watching on iFollow. I've watched as many matches this season as I normally watch, because I don't watch them all. But with iFollow, it doesn't matter whether it's away or at home. So I watch most of the matches, and that's a bizarre experience watching a football match. I've managed to rig it up with a cable so I can watch it on my television, but watching an empty stadium, it's a bit like watching a pre-season friendly on television. It's bizarre, but better than nothing.
But how come they're so bad this year? What's happened? 22nd, I think, aren't they?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think that the standard in Division 2 is probably greater than it was in previous years. And I think one of the things is one factor. So, there isn't much room for deterioration. And the other thing that I think that's unusual compared to the Premier League is that I honestly don't think that the gap between maybe the team that's the runaway promotion, challenges in a particular year, but the gap between the teams that are on the cusp of the playoffs and the teams lower down the league isn't that great. And what Robbie Cowling, the owner, did was he decided that he's had a long-term strategy of not spending beyond the means of the club. And his business plan for the club succeeding is that he runs a very successful accredited academy, and occasionally sells a player. And if you've got an accredited academy, if a player gets sold, every time they get as a young age, every time they get sold, and thereafter the club gets a little bit of money. It should be a hell of a lot more. It's criminal activity by the Premier League, the pathetic amount of money they do give to the lower league clubs that discover players. But anyway, so his strategy historically has been academy plus living in your means, and then subsidising the club through selling on academy players when the time comes. So come COVID, his strategy was, okay, we've got even less income now, so he's got to scale back his players bill. So last year he shed 4 of our strongest players, and I think his strategy was that there was going to be loads of clubs shedding players, so he'd be able to pick up good replacements to replace the slightly more expensive ones that he was shedding. He thought there was going to be a glut of players on the market. I think that he's probably been more risk averse than even the other teams in the lower league. Some have got into financial trouble, some have shed players, they've all shed a few, But I think he went for the extreme option of bringing even more kids into the team and trying to avoid threatening the club's finances by really cutting back on the squad and selling on, well, not selling on, letting go. They very rarely sell players, letting go some of the best players. Now, coming back to where I started about the gap between the top teams in the league and the bottom teams not been that great, the consequence of them taking out 4 players. And yes, he even managed to bring one of them back, Frank Nouble, but the consequence of taking out 4 players, disrupting the squad, relying more on the youth, has been that the teams dipped. And because of the closeness between the teams in League Two compared to the Premier League, it's pretty unforgiving when you've deteriorated a bit more than all the other teams. And then I think what happened was around about Christmas time, they started losing matches. And I think one of the things about young teams is they're quite volatile. When they get to a point where they're losing confidence, they don't just dig in, they really lose confidence. So I think that, so the squad's not as strong, the players aren't as strong. And then when the bubble burst and they lost their confidence, they drop like a stone. So and the annoying thing is a striker that could put a few goals in consistently, and a few, I don't know, a few big ugly players that have been there, seen it, and done relegation battles and all that. And I think they could very quickly transform. That there ain't any new players coming in. Frank Nouble was the last of note. There's a few ones come in that haven't exactly set the team alight recently. So I think it's now a struggle. I think it's, if it was day 0 of the season and we were starting the relegation battle from today, I'd say we were down. I'd say we'd had it, and I would say we will go down. But given we're still, I think it's 5 points ahead, the teams at the bottom are all pretty appalling. So we might, with the new manager that they brought in, just keep our necks above it or just go down. It's jury's out. Let's see what happens this afternoon.
Do you think that because there are no fans there, that's had anything to do with the current form? And also, what would it mean if Colchester were relegated from League Two?
Well, I suppose I'm sceptical about whether the fans has made the big issue, because obviously all the teams have lost their fans. So in that sense, it's a level playing field. And I think of late, because Colchester have just sort of seemed to have been on this downward spiral for some years, and because there's a lot of skepticism about the system that we play, 4-2-3-1, that we play amongst a lot of the fans, and there's a skepticism about recruit players and recruit managers from within. I think that the Colchester fans have got a bit of a reputation for getting on the backs of the players, which, going back to the younger players losing their confidence, there was a season or 2 ago where our home form was appalling, and I speculated on social media at the time that was partly because we'd go in a goal down, we wouldn't get behind them to try and, even if they were playing reasonably well, we'd go, oh God, this is it, here we go again, drag them down with us. I'm sceptical about whether our home form's pretty good. You could even put up, I think our home form's better than our away form, so maybe you could put up a case to say without the fans on their back, the young lads are doing slightly better than they would have been.
And how long have you been a fan of Colchester then? Was it through your family?
No, I'm a very odd Colchester United fan. I don't know if you can pick up the remnants of my northern accent. I'm from Oldham. I was born in Yorkshire. I spent most of my childhood in Oldham, on the side of the Pennines in Oldham. So in the late 1960s, I became a Manchester United fan. And until 17 years ago, when I moved to Colchester, I'd been a Manchester United fan all my life. I spent some years, 4 years in Brighton when I went to college and stayed there a bit longer. And then I moved to North London. But I remained a Manchester United fan through all that period. And I think there was two factors. One was that Brighton, when I was Brighton and Hove, was that they went down and then now come back up again. But they were a first division side when I was in at university. And then when I moved to London, I lived variously within walking distance of Tottenham, and then within walking distance of Highbury. And there was no way on earth that a Manchester United fan was going to jump ship to the likes of Arsenal or Tottenham. It just couldn't happen. I didn't even go, except when they played Manchester United, even though I could hear the grounds in the distance. But I moved to Colchester, and Layer Road, the old ground, was within earshot of my garden. And my stepfather came down and he said, well, let's go to a match. There's an FA Cup match. So we walked over to the ground and we went. And some things struck me immediately. One was that the ground was at that time literally in the heart of the community. You know, I'd got a friend the ball used to get kicked into his back garden occasionally, and they hoofed it over the stadium, the stand. And so it was rooted in the community. The other thing that struck me, it was a cup match, so there was a bit of an atmosphere. And I went in and there was terraces, and the bar side, which is where the keenest fans went, which was not at one of the ends, but it was the side of the ground, was proper terracing, and there was all the sort of the banter and the chat. So I then linked up with a bloke that was parent of one of the kids that my daughters had met at school, and I started going with him. And round about that time, they started their promotion push for the championship, because they were in the first division at the time. And so the ground only held, I think it was 7,000. And so most matches, it would be pretty crowded. And I was going so regularly, I got a season ticket. And there was a group of blokes I got to know. I'm new to the area, so I'm meeting lots of new people. And after about a year or so, I found that I wasn't just going to Colchester because it was convenient. That was the first result I was looking for in the paper or looking for on the news when I wasn't at the match. And I didn't really make any big decision that now I'm going to be a Colchester fan. It just sort of crept up on me. And round about the same time, the Glaziers bought Manchester United. And so any tenuous link between the experience of being a Manchester United fan in the Red Army years of the 1970s was completely broken. You know, there's barely. I obviously went to the Manchester United Colchester match last season when we played them in the quarterfinal in the League Cup, and the only thing that I recognised about the whole experience of being anything to do with what I did in the 1970s was when I was walking out of the ground just at the bottom of the Warwick Road, which is the main drag which most fans come down to get to the ground. There was a mural on the wall with Tommy Docherty holding up the FA Cup, a match that I'd been to, an FA Cup final from the 1970s. I think it was holding up with maybe Brian Greenough. Anyway, it was holding up the FA Cup, and I had my picture taken against this. And also that they've kept the the Munich air disaster clock, stuck it on the side of the new ground. But to be frank, absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with. People kept saying to me, "Oh, is it bringing back memories?" And I was going, "Well, not really." No. It was just absolute. And I joked at the time. I wrote an article that they put in the Gazette, because I was obviously a bit of an oddity, you know, the former Manchester United fan returning to Old Trafford as a Colchester United fan. And I said that when I walked onto the bar side, getting on for 20 years ago, 7 years ago, I felt in some small way, it wasn't as big, but the whole terrace experience, the banter, the chat, the walking there with your mates, going to the pub beforehand, all that experience, that to me took me back to the Red Army years in the 70s under Tommy Docherty at Manchester United, and had more to do with what I loved about football than anything that happens at the Theatre of Dreams or whatever they call it these days. So I became a Colchester United fan.
And how much has not attending games affected you?
Oh God, massively. Well, I've just described the whole reasoning, the whole emotional, the whole cultural thing of being a football fan and what it means to me. And I was so excited when I started going on the bar side at Colchester United. The new community stadiums, your box standard 10 ground on the edge of town, bloody awful place compared to what it's like at the bar side. For you know, it's a bit more comfortable, but for the fan experience, it's dire. And so, anyway, going back to what matters to me as a football fan, watching an empty ground on the television couldn't be further away from what I want to experience as a football fan. By myself, because my mates can't come around. On the telly, I don't usually watch much television on football except England in big competitions. In an empty ground, so there was no fan atmosphere. Yeah, the nearest thing I got to banter was exchanging messages about the misery we were all under Twitter with other followers of Colchester United. You know, so it couldn't be worse. And if this is a bit leap of the imagination. Say I'd moved to Colchester 17 years ago and it had been in the middle of the lockdown, I wouldn't have had any interest ever in watching Colchester United on iFollow, and I wouldn't have had much interest. I suspect on watching the big matches. I might have watched the odd Manchester United match. So for me, the whole experience of going to football is you meet up with your mates, you go to the pub, you speculate about what it's going to be like. You know, you have a few pints, you have a bit of banter. You maybe see some of the away fans in the pub and have a bit of banter with them and find out what their teams, how they're doing and what they reckon's going to happen. You maybe have, you know, a young kid, you know, young girl or young boy dragged along by their parents, maybe going to, you know, doing what I did, you know, 40, 50 years ago, going to one of my first football matches with the men, you know, and so, you know, we all go to the ground and then you have the banter and you sit near or stand near people you usually stand and you sort of, you're swapping views on what's happening. And then there's all the chat and the you know, the humour of football fans. You know, it might not work in the Premier League because they, you know, the top four think that you know, unless they're winning 2-0, it's a disaster. But you know, that humour, that gallows humour that football fans have that turn out week in, week out to watch an abysmal side, you know, all those things come together. And I'm not sure the burned pie at lunch at half time helps, but all the things of that experience and the memories and the place all come together. And the football is part of that. And the fans' relationship with the players is part of that. Just watching it on the television cold. Like, I think I'm fairly unusual that I go to lots of football matches live during the course of a season, but I very rarely watch Match of the Day because of that. It's not, that's not the way I do football.
And with the vaccine rollout going as well as it is, would you feel safe going to a game next season?
Yeah. I'm relatively old, but not that old, 59. So I always thought that the lockdown was in part for me, because I'm not young, but was largely speaking for people in vulnerable groups. It was for the elderly, it was for people with disabilities, it was for making sure that the NHS didn't get swamped. So my pretty rigorous, not complete, my pretty rigorous following of the rules has, in my mindset, has never been mainly for me. I haven't been gauging what risk am I personally exposed to, things. It's more me being part of a bigger collective in the country, all doing the right thing to make sure that the NHS isn't swamped and to make sure that people in the vulnerable groups are protected. So, I'm going to, as long as it goes ahead, I've got my ticket to go to WOMAD, the World Music Festival, in July, and I'll be back in the ground as soon as they reopen. I've had my first jab, and by the time we're allowed to go into football grounds and go to music festivals, I'll have had my second one. So even if you get it, you get a very mild version of it. So I'll be in there as soon as I can.
And
in the pubs the first day they open as well.
Yeah, can't wait to get back to a pub. And is this sort of summed it up already, really? But is sport the same without fans?
No. It's I have, the fan experience that you heard me talk about. The relationship between the fans, fan culture, the sense of identity with the place that you live in, the fact that your social network, the people that you know best that are interested in football all go to the same ground. That cohesion, that culture, that shared experience is what makes football for me. Like, if it was just about watching the best football, you'd find out where the Champions League was going to be on television. You'd invest in a very cable or satellite dish or something and just watch the Champions League. You wouldn't even bother with, well, you probably wouldn't even bother with the early rounds of that, would you? Because you get some teams that have a standard chance. You certainly wouldn't bother with the Premiership, because in terms of interesting football, unless it's one of the top 4 or 5 playing each other, it's not a competition, is it? Sometimes it's like watching Manchester City play in the Premier League. It's about as interesting as a sporting spectacle as watching the Harlem Globetrotters play basketball and the Harlem Globetrotters. Exhibition football. The team that's, and so to me, it's not about that. Watching the best team play the best football with the biggest stars. It's about place. It's about fan culture. It's about the experience. It's about shared experience. It's about having a laugh. It's about all those things coming together. And I'll get far more enjoyment getting back to watching Colchester United, even if they're in the bloody National League next season. And I would love watching Match of the Day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.